So The Rock's character, one of his strengths is the boomerang. So when I think about the boomerang effect, a lot of times that happens with delegation, where you become an expert at the boomerang, where you get it off your plate and then the team member doesn't do it the way that you anticipated, or they kind of take on their own vision for it because you weren't clear with what your vision was. And what happens? Well, they're messing up. Let me go in and save them, and let me be an expert at the boomerang, and let me take it back. So my question for you is, are you being Dwayne Johnson in Jumanji, or Dr. Bravestone, is what his formal character's name is, where you are an expert at the boomerang to a fault? Welcome to CEO Conversations, the private practice podcast. I'm your host, Brandy Mabra. It's time to show up as a confident leader to create a practice and life you love. Hello. Welcome back to another episode of CEO Conversations, the private practice podcast. Today, we are talking about something that is so simple to say. It's a simple, super simple word, and it can flow, and it flows in so many different forums, especially for folks who talk about teams. And the word of the day is delegation. Yeah, delegation. I would say before I started my business, I was a delegation queen. I mean, I was relentless with getting something off my plate once I learned the power of it. And I wanted to talk about the freedom that comes with delegation. But delegation, too, is complex. And I don't think that we talk enough about the nuances of when you truly get something off of your plate. And so that's the point of today's conversation. There is greatness when it comes to delegation. There's freedom when it comes to delegation. But there is also the realness of what happens when delegation goes wrong and what can happen from that, and the realness of what can happen with that. So let's talk about it. As you know, I have a lot of credentials when it comes to the business side of your practice. And so when I think about delegation, I think that the story that is always sold, and I've said this before, is if I get something off my plate, if I hire a team member, it's super simple. They'll take over all of my stuff, and I'll be able to sip cocktails on the beach. There was an amazing client that I worked with, and I loved some of the work that she did because she talked specifically about the delegation process, but from a lens of what happens like in childhood, right? And so when we think about getting something truly off of our plate, there's a lot of emotions that can be attached to that for why you do, why you don't, some of the control that we want to have, some of maybe old wounds that need to be healed. Her specific skill set was diving into childhood wounds that would impact leaders, and some of the things that they would have to navigate, especially as they started delegation processes with their team, or as they were talking to their team, or potential things that would happen within team dynamics that would impact them in a deeper way. And I thought it was just so interesting because, again, when we think about the conversation, it's like, oh, I'll get it off my plate. I'll be able to, fly over to Hawaii and be able to not even have to worry about it, and everything's going to be done. And as amazing as that sounds, it's fake news, right? Now, is it possible for you to get something off your plate? When we think about true freedom, to get something off of your plate and be able to sip cocktails in Hawaii? Oh, absolutely. I just got back from Singapore and Thailand, and I will say I'm super impressed with my team. I'm super impressed. And I was able to relax. I was able to, really turn things off. And then I inserted myself when I wanted to insert myself. And it wasn't because I felt like I needed to. It was because I was choosing to, right? And so those are two completely different feelings, where you're supposed to get something off your plate, but you don't really have the capacity to get it off your plate, and then you're worried about it. I wasn't worried at all. And so there's freedom with it, but it just has to be done the right way. So now that we've gotten all that out of the way, let's talk about why delegation maybe doesn't work. When we think about your team collectively, if you're listening to this and you're like, man, I would love to be able to get some stuff off my plate. I would love to be able to go sip cocktails on the beach. I would love to be able to not have to worry about my team. But I just don't trust them, right? And so when we think about the delegation process at the root, trust is number one. And if you don't trust your team to get it done, then you will want to take it back every single time. I would love to be able to have like $1, maybe even $5, maybe even $20 for every time I would hear, well, it's quicker for me to do it. No, it's not that it's quicker for you to do it. It's because you maybe don't necessarily trust the person that you would need to give it to. And you're telling yourself it's quicker for you to do it. Because I guarantee you, with the right team in place, and from my experience, usually they're faster, they're quicker, they have an expertise that you are trying to maybe dive into or get into that you don't really have. So the saving of time really is costing you so much in the long run. And so a lot of delegation, when we think about when it goes like wrong, it comes down to mindset, right? So the vision isn't there, the clarity for what you need to get off your plate or why you need to get it off your plate or why it's important for the next person to do it and what it's really costing you when you don't get it off of your plate is the true conversation around delegation and what we really need to dig into. There's something that happened called the boomerang effect. So I think about the movie Jumanji, like not the old school Jumanji, like the new Jumanji with Kevin Hart. There's Dwayne Johnson, The Rock. There's Jack Black that's in it. So The Rock's character, one of his strengths is the boomerang, right? And so when you send the boomerang goes and it comes right back. So when I think about the boomerang effect, a lot of times that happens with delegation, where you become an expert at the boomerang, where you get it off your plate and then the team member doesn't do it the way that you anticipated, or they kind of take on their own vision for it because you weren't clear with what your vision was. You didn't communicate it appropriately. And what happens? Well, they're messing up. Let me go in and save them and let me be an expert at the boomerang and let me take it back. Because it's easier for me to do it. I can do it better. No one can do it the way that I can do it. And that's what we tell ourselves, right? All in the sake of, let me go and help my team out. And that's not effective delegation. So my question for you is, are you being Dwayne Johnson in Jumanji or Dr. Bravestone, is what his formal character's name is, where you are an expert at the boomerang and that is one of your strengths? To a fault, right? So it's important for you to understand what really needs to happen before you get anything off of your plate. So when we think about our team collectively, and I talk about this inside of Private Practice CEO all the time, there's 3 types of team members. And then within those 3 types of team members, I've said this before, there's certain types of team members, even within these 3 types of team members. So when we think about your team identities, then there are doers, owners, and leaders. So those are always the 3. When we're building a practice or when we're scaling a practice, you go between those identities. Sometimes you first hire a doer. And so the doer is there to really do. They are taking tasks off of your plate. They're making your life easier. There is a complexity sometimes when we talk about leadership, which we're not going to talk about that, what can happen with a doer identity. But they are there just to task. That's what they're there for. The next identity is owner. When we think about the owner of a team member or identity, team member identity, the owner is there to own a certain process. Maybe they're owning a project. Maybe they own an area or they own an expertise, and they're owning, right? So when we think about a really high level owner, that person is there saying, this is what's working with the process, this is what's broken with the process, or this is what's the status of the project, this is what we're working on, this is the due dates. They just own it. You don't have to own it as a CEO because they own it, right? Or another person on your team doesn't have to own it because they're taking the full responsibility when it comes to whatever they're working on, which is different than a doer. A doer, to put the 2 together, is probably helping the owner within either a process or a system, or helping them out when it comes to getting things off of the owner's plate for task. So that's how those two work together. The next identity would be a leader. Now, oftentimes when I say leader, people automatically think like, oh, well, that's my clinical director, or oh, that's my COO, or oh, that's maybe my CMO, for those who have medical practices. Like, maybe that's my chief medical officer. Maybe that's my practice manager. Somebody with a leadership title is my point. And when I say leader, it goes beyond titles. You could name somebody a leadership title all day long, and it doesn't necessarily mean that they're a true leader. When we think about that, it goes beyond titles. When you feel the presence of a leader, you can feel it. You feel it as soon as they walk in the room. They come with a sense of command, right? Or just the essence. They walk in and you're just like, oh, wow. They own a room, right? So they have really the best leaders can go between doing, owning, and leading. And when we think about the true leader within your practice, that person is there to rally the troops. They're working with the doers. They're looking at the owners. They're looking at the fact of what's really working, what's really not working. They're bringing suggestions. You're probably the person like, wow, they make my life so much easier. Or they're bringing ideas that maybe you didn't even think about. Or they're saying, hey, I saw this. Like, you just feel it and you just want more of it, right? Because they're leading. So when we think about delegation, your job as the CEO is to know, who am I working with? When you think about your team collectively, I hope you're taking notes. When you think about your team collectively, what identity are they wearing? Are they wearing the doer hat? Are they wearing the owner hat? Or are they wearing the leader hat? Remember, it goes beyond titles, right? You're selling yourself short if you are just looking at titles. You're looking at key traits of this person, what their weaknesses are, what their strengths are, what their skill set is. I talk about when you hire, there's 3 things to pay attention to when you're hiring. And the framework is you're looking at a person's strengths, you're looking at a person's skill set, and you're looking at the culture fit. So when you pull that back, now you're looking at what identity would they wear inside of my practice, the doer, the owner, or the leader. And to add another level to this, because what can happen as your practice continues to grow and change and evolve, now you're looking at, based on identity too, are they a low performer, a middle performer, or a high performer? And this is where the complexity of teams gets people every single time. So if you're not used to navigating that, or if you're not used to looking at a team from that perspective, or if you're having a hard time holding people accountable, setting expectations, you don't understand, like, why can't they just think like me? Or this is easy for me, or why can't you do it? Or why is it I gave it to you and it's not getting done the way that I thought? Why is it taking you so long? It's because there's all these different dynamics that are happening within your team member that you have to pay attention to before you even get it off your plate. So with delegation, there's 7 steps that I always like to say. And I'm not going to go through all 7 steps. If you want all 7 steps, then, come on inside Private Practice CEO and I'll make sure that you're straight with all 7 steps, because I could whip off 7 steps and it sounds super simple. Again, the word delegation, simple. It's easy to say. You can sound it out, but when it actually happens in real time, it can be scary. It's a scary place. So you're not alone. But yes, so the 7 steps. The most critical one, I will say, of the 7 steps is to know your team. So to know your team's strengths and weaknesses. And so before you even get off your plate, you're looking at that first. So getting very clear on who is the right person on my team to get this done. I will say, if you look around your team and you need to get things off your plate and you're like, man, I can't give this to nobody, that's telling you something about your team, right? And so you either need to train up your team, mentor your team in order to get them ready, or maybe you need to get some new team members. That's a story for another day. So there's so many things that we could go into, but I'm going to stay focused. So with the 7 steps, first of all, knowing your team. The second thing, which is actually towards the end of the 7 steps that you really need to pay attention to, is when is the due date? And what is the follow-up? So more times than not, people will say, do this, do that, XYZ, blah, 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 ba ba da ba da, like all those words. And then they forget to say, when does it need to be done by? So what happens is the due date is usually floating around in your head where, oh, I would love for it to be done by the end of the day, but you don't necessarily say that. Or I would love for it to be done within the next hour, but you don't really say that. And so then the hour passes, or sometimes the day passes, or sometimes days passed, or sometimes weeks passed. And then you look up and you're like, why they not do it? Like you're mad. And it's because you never set a clear expectation for what the deadline was. So whenever you get something off of your plate, you need to pay attention to first, who am I giving it to and are they equipped to do it? Skipping steps. But the second thing is, when is the deadline? And then the third thing is, when's the follow-up? Like, what's the follow-up cadence to make sure that the person, because sometimes with team members, again, they're complex. They will take something off their plate because they're either wanting to please the person who's trying to delegate it. They're trying to be a true contributor to the team. And sometimes they will sit on something because they have questions. They don't want to look stupid. They're afraid to ask. You've given them the privilege of being able to help. They don't want to look some kind of way in front of their peers. They don't want to seem incapable. They might think that they're going to be fired. Like, there's all these things that can happen and emotions that they're processing. So when you have a good follow-up plan in place, then you're able to have built-in feedback, built-in asking questions, built-in, you didn't work on this for 2 weeks and gave it back to me, and now we are behind for 2 weeks because I didn't go and talk to you 2 days after I assigned it to you. So making sure that you understand, again, what does your team need in order for you to be a really great super delegator. Oftentimes with the 7 steps, what our clients do, they actually put it up in front of their face, like they'll hang it up. They put it on the side to their desk, especially for those who might be struggling with either the boomerang effect, or I can do it myself, or it's quicker for me compared to my team, or sometimes even there's the emotions, my team is busy. And I suffer from this one, so I want to speak for experience for this one. Your team has said yes to helping you. You pay them well. I'm going to assume that you pay them well. I'm going to also assume, right, wrong, or indifferent, that they are doing okay, that they are going to be their own advocate, and they are going to say if they are struggling. From a leadership lens, you have to sometimes assume that people will say, I'm out, or I'm in, or I'm having a problem, because you can't necessarily get in the boat with your team members. So with that being said, sometimes people will hold on to things because they think that they're being a bother to their team member. I don't want to give them anything else. They're going through a really rough time, or they're having a hard time, or this just happened, or that just happened. And this is all you. It's like internal dialogue that your team member hasn't said, I'm going through a really hard time, or I can't do this, or I'm busy, or I have enough on my plate. But the assumption is there. And the reason why the assumption is there is because we are all heart-centered. We want best for people. We are here to make sure people are well. We don't want our teams to burn out. But sometimes that is at the detriment of ourselves and our burnout, and of the practices, growth, and sustainability, because we're taking on these things that no one has told us. And so instead of having a true conversation about what is your capacity, how are you doing, can you take it, then we just assume no, So you're stressing yourself out. And from my experience, what I've found, when I'm honest, actually, yes, I would love to take this on. I need the distraction. I'm going through some things. This is fun for me. You've hired me for a reason. I need money. I have bills I have to pay. So please don't make me, get evicted because you're assuming I can't work when I never told you I didn't want to work. So it's important for you to understand, to have open communication with your team. And that's part of the 7 steps of delegation as well. So again, delegation, it's an easy word to say, but it's very complex to do because there's all these nuances that can happen in the conversation. So when you delegate and there is the wrong skill set, man, goodness gracious, because you want your team to be so good at something. That's what I see. And that's what I've experienced, where you want your team. I really want them to be good at billing, or I really want them to be great at scheduling, or I really want them to be great at being this manager or supervisor. I really want them to be great at operations, but they are not. Sometimes your scheduler is not a biller. Sometimes the front desk person that you've hired isn't equipped with those skill sets. Sometimes the provider that you've hired isn't able to look at things from an operational lens or understand the business side. Sometimes the leader that you've hired isn't equipped to lead appropriately despite their title. And so when you delegate certain aspects of the business to people with the wrong skill set, either because they're not ready or because they haven't learned it or because they don't want that as part of their job duties, is not in alignment with the vision that they have for their career growth, or they're just not capable, then that's hard and that's frustrating. And that is where you as a CEO have to recognize they're not truly ready for it. And sometimes team members will sit up there and be like, no, I can do it. I can do it. And they just honestly just can't do it. And so you have to step in. And if they're not being their own advocate, then sometimes you do have to step in to help them be their own, to be their advocate. Again, there's a difference. And so this is not a cookie cutter or a blanket statement of any kind. Teams are complex. But having open communication and making sure that you are being honest about, do they truly have a skill set, or is this just not appropriate, is important. Because if not, then what will happen is it will cause you weeks, months, days, times, hours, like frustration and energy, unnecessary stress. And you don't necessarily have to go through all of that. So that's why, remember, step number 1 of delegation is looking at what are their strengths and what is their skill sets, and are they fully set up before I even give them this task? So that way you're not wasting time. So when you have true roles inside of your practice, and so this is where your practice is, you have like different layers. So when we think about the organizational structure of a business, then you do have team members, you have levels to team members and levels of structure within your business. And so if you have a leadership team, then your leadership team should be working on leadership type tasks. And your leadership team should be working on and owning leadership type of things. And your leadership should be helping you to execute anything that you need as a CEO when it comes to your vision and your mission. If that is off, then something's wrong. Providers, when we think about roles and different things, there's the clinical lens, right? And so with the clinical lens, you should be able to really delegate clinically that aspect of your business. So if you are still wearing the clinical director hat or the medical director hat within your practice, then do you have anybody on your team that could help with some of that? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. And then you have the admin part of your practice. And so when you think about the practice and roles administratively, then you should be able to delegate appropriately there. So those are, billing, scheduling, marketing, that's kind of like the admin house of things. And when you think about your roles, sometimes there's cross, right? So when we think about the practice from the front to the back, the front is important to work with the back. And more times than not, when I say the front and the back, it's more or less the clinical piece of your practice needs to work well with the administrative piece of your practice, or the operations part of your practice needs to flow well. You need to have a well-oiled practice. So again, delegation, complex. Sometimes the question I always get is like, okay, well, I have real things, and maybe you're listening to this, like I have real things I need to get off my plate because I emotionally want to be able to spend time doing other things. For me, I've talked about this, like I was burned out, and I've been burned out, and my family is my rock. So I love being able to spend time with my family. I love being able to pour back into myself. I love being able to travel. I love being able to do things that fill me up in addition to my business. One thing that I've gotten very good at this point in time is paying attention to what I can get off my plate. When I first started my business, I will say that was a journey, right? So I went from being a delegation queen to like, wait a minute, like this is my name. Like if my name gets run through Google, I don't want that. Or if I get put out, where the cancel culture of things, I don't want that for myself. So it's real. Like the emotions that you feel are real. However, one thing with the delegation piece is if you want to grow, if you want to help more people, if you want to create real legacy, if you want to make more money, you have to get things off of your plate. So one thing that I have gotten good at is really paying attention to what my body is telling me. And then also I keep track. So if I'm sitting at my desk and I'm working on something and I can feel my body starting to tense up, and I can start to feel anxiety around it, or I can start to feel like, man, I don't want to work on this. And sometimes in business, you just have to do what you have to do, right? And there will be things that light you up inside of your business, and there will be some things that just feel like, let me just get this done, right? So there's a really great book about eat the frog. So when you eat the frog, like the big thing that you don't want to do, you usually set yourself up for success with that. But the number one thing that you can do this week is if there is something where your body tenses, you recognize that you're banging your head up against the wall trying to do it. There's a skill set that maybe you just don't have that you need to delegate out. Write it down. So I have a whiteboard thing area in my office. And so I will write it down on a Post-it and I put it on the whiteboard. So I have lists of things that I'm getting off of my plate as my business continues to grow. So that's one thing that you can do this week if you're looking for what can I do about the situation that I'm in, and making sure that I'm being strategic and intentional about getting things off my plate. The other thing that you can do is just listen to your body, right? Like having a business can be fun. I love my business. I love the work I get to do. I love the work that I got to do when it comes to building practices and scaling practices. I love the fact that I'm able and blessed to be able to do that with private practice owners at this point in time. Like everything is fun, but I have a whole team behind me that helps me with things. And I don't want to sit there and try to figure out what I'm going to post on social media. I don't want to do that. I don't want to have to try to edit my podcast, or I don't want to have to schedule appointments when I was scheduling appointments when I had the practices and stuff. Like I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to learn about billing. I can do billing. There's a lot of things that you can do inside your practice. You can learn it. I didn't want to do that, and even from my clinical skill set, I outgrew that area and I didn't want to do it. I wanted to focus more on the business side of things. And so you evolve as a CEO, and your body will tell you every single time what that evolution needs to look like, and you need to just track it, right? So you might not even necessarily have the budget. I know that's going to be coming up. I don't have the budget to hire. You can plan to hire. You can create your job description as you are getting very familiar with the tasks that you want to get off of your plate. So going back to the Post-it on the whiteboard, that's future job descriptions, right? Those are future positions within my business. And I recommend for my clients to do the same thing. I'm going to recommend for you to do the same thing. That set yourself up for your future job description. So I hope that this was a helpful conversation when it comes to delegation. Again, delegation is an easy word, but when you actually start to think about it, that's where the complexity comes into play. So have fun with it. Have the beach with the palm trees in order to motivate you, or whatever that carrot is for you, in order to get things off of your plate. But there is freedom in delegation. I promise you that. But you have to get very clear with the vision that you have and what success looks like for you, for your team, when you actually get things off of your plate. So if you need some deeper support, you know that there is Private Practice CEO that is available for you. So you can always see the show notes for the link in order for you to apply. Or if you want to test me out because you don't know me yet, then you can always come to one of our Own Your CEO Status masterclasses. And inside that, we are teaching you how to take your practice from $500,000 a year to $5 million a year, all through leadership and really learning the business side of your practice. So again, that information is in the show notes as well too. So I will see you guys next time. Bye. Thanks for listening today. I hope you enjoyed the episode and it empowers you as the CEO of your practice. If you enjoyed the podcast, please make sure you subscribe, share the message, and leave a review. If you want more information and support in growing and scaling your practice, click the link in the show notes to take advantage of our free resources or apply to work with me directly. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time.